She stared at the pregnancy test in her trembling hands, the two pink lines blurring through her tears. The father wasn't just any man, he was her best friend of 15 years, the single dad billionaire who had just announced his engagement to another woman on national television 3 hours ago. And he had absolutely no memory of the night that changed everything. But here's what she didn't know, he remembered every single moment. Every whispered confession. Every touch. Every promise made in the darkness. And the engagement? It was all a lie designed to protect her from the one person who would destroy them both if the truth ever came out. The rain hammered against the floor-to-ceiling windows of Alexander Kane's penthouse office, each droplet racing down the glass like tears the billionaire CEO refused to shed. He stood with his back to the door, his tall, athletic frame silhouetted against the gray Manhattan skyline, one hand pressed against the cold glass as if trying to reach through to some other reality where everything hadn't gone so catastrophically wrong. His reflection stared back at him, fair skin, sharp jawline, those piercing blue eyes that had graced the covers of Forbes and Fortune more times than he could count. At 38, Alexander Kane had built an empire from nothing, raised a daughter single-handedly after his wife's death, and earned a reputation as the most eligible bachelor in New York. But none of that mattered now. None of it had ever really mattered, because the only thing he'd ever truly wanted was about to walk out of his life forever. The intercom buzzed. "Mr. Kane, Miss Charlotte Webb is here for your 3 o'clock. His heart stopped. Actually stopped. He could feel it, that terrifying pause between beats where the world holds its breath and waits for everything to either fall apart or somehow come together. Charlotte Webb. Charlie. His best friend. His business partner. The woman he'd been desperately, hopelessly, secretly in love with for the past 15 years. "Send her in," he said, his voice betraying none of the chaos raging inside him. The door opened, and there she was. Charlotte walked in like she owned the place, which, technically, she partly did, holding 20% of Kane Industries as his co-founder and chief creative officer. Her long, silky dark hair cascaded over her shoulders in waves that caught the dim light, and even in a simple cream blouse and tailored navy pants, her perfect figure commanded attention. She was the kind of beautiful that made men forget their own names, but it was her mind that had captured Alexander all those years ago in that cramped college dorm room where they'd first met. Today, though, something was different. Her porcelain skin was paler than usual, her green eyes red-rimmed and swollen. She'd been crying. "We need to talk," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. Alexander turned fully to face her, his expression carefully neutral even as his insides twisted. "That's generally what people do in conversations, Charlie. Talk. Exchange words. Sometimes even complete sentences if they're feeling particularly ambitious." Normally, she would have laughed. Would have fired back some witty retort that would lead them into their comfortable dance of banter and hidden meanings. But today, she just stared at him with those devastated eyes, and Alexander felt something crack inside his chest. "I saw the announcement," she said. "On TV. 3 hours ago. You're engaged to Victoria Sterling." The name hung in the air between them like poison. Victoria Sterling. Daughter of Maxwell Sterling, the man who had been trying to destroy Kane Industries for the past decade. The man who had killed Alexander's wife, though no one could ever prove it. The man who had threatened, just 3 weeks ago, to reveal a secret that would destroy not just Alexander, but Charlotte and everyone they loved. "Yes," Alexander said simply, because what else could he say? The truth? That the engagement was a business arrangement designed to merge their companies and neutralize Sterling's threats? That he'd rather cut out his own heart than marry anyone who wasn't Charlotte? "Were you ever going to tell me?" Her voice cracked on the last word. "Or was I just going to find out when the wedding invitation arrived? Dear Charlotte, please join us as Alexander marries the daughter of the man who murdered his first wife. Cocktails at 6, soul-crushing betrayal included." There it was. That fire. That spark that had made him fall in love with her in the first place. Charlie. No. She held up her hand, and he noticed it was trembling. I didn't come here to fight about your terrible taste in fiancés. I came here because there's something I need to tell you. Something that changes everything. Alexander's blood ran cold. She couldn't know. There was no way she could know about that night 3 weeks ago, the night that had simultaneously been the best and worst of his entire life. The night of his daughter Sophie's 16th birthday party, when the champagne had flowed a little too freely and the music had played a little too long. The night when Charlotte had shown up at his penthouse at 2 in the morning, tears streaming down her beautiful face because her latest relationship had ended in spectacular fashion. The night when one drink had turned into 5, when comfort had turned into confession, when 15 years of suppressed longing had finally exploded in a single, devastating, world-altering kiss. And everything that had followed. Alexander remembered every second of it. The way she'd tasted. The way she'd whispered his name like a prayer. The way she'd looked at him as if he was the only thing in the universe that mattered. But the next morning, he'd woken up alone. She'd left a note, "I'm so sorry. I was drunk. Please, let's pretend this never happened." So he had. Or at least, he'd pretended to pretend. He'd acted like he didn't remember anything, like the alcohol had wiped his memory clean, like his entire world hadn't shifted on its axis. But now, looking at her face, at the fear and determination warring in her eyes, he knew with absolute certainty that their night together had consequences neither of them could have anticipated. "Charlotte," he said slowly, his heart hammering so loudly he was sure she could hear it, "what do you need to tell me?" She reached into her purse with shaking hands and pulled out a small plastic stick. Even from across the room, he could see the 2 pink lines. "I'm pregnant, Alex. And you're the father. And I know you don't remember what happened that night, but I remember everything. Every single moment. Every word you said. Every promise you made." Her voice broke completely now, tears spilling down her porcelain cheeks. "You told me you loved me. You told me you'd loved me since the moment we met. You told me that if I'd just give you a chance, you'd spend the rest of your life proving that I was the only woman you'd ever want." She threw the pregnancy test at him, and he caught it reflexively, staring at the evidence of everything he wanted and everything he was about to lose. "But I guess promises made in the dark don't count, right?" she continued, her words sharp as broken glass. "I guess when the sun comes up and reality sets in, it's easier to pretend it never happened. Easier to run into the arms of Victoria Sterling and her blood money than to face what we could have been." "Charlie, wait." "No." She was backing toward the door now, her long hair swinging with each step. "I just needed you to know. I'm keeping this baby, Alexander. With or without you. I've spent 15 years being your best friend, your business partner, your shoulder to cry on. I've watched you date models and actresses and socialites while pretending I didn't care. I've held your daughter while you worked late nights and early mornings, and I've loved Sophie like she was my own child. I've given you everything I have, every piece of my heart, and all I've ever asked for in return was your friendship." She paused at the door, her hand on the handle, and when she looked back at him, the devastation in her eyes nearly brought him to his knees. "But I can't do this anymore. I can't stand beside you at your wedding and pretend I'm happy. I can't watch you build a life with someone else while carrying your child inside me. So this is goodbye, Alexander. I'll have my lawyer contact yours about dissolving my shares in the company." "Charlotte, please, just let me explain." "There's nothing to explain." She turned the handle. "You made your choice. Now I'm making mine." The door slammed behind her, and Alexander Kane, the man who had built an empire through sheer force of will, sank into his chair and buried his face in his hands. The pregnancy test clattered to the floor, those 2 pink lines staring up at the ceiling like an accusation. She thought he didn't remember. She thought he didn't love her. And he couldn't tell her the truth, because the truth would put her in danger. Maxwell Sterling's threat had been crystal clear: marry Victoria, or Charlotte Webb would suffer the same fate as Alexander's first wife. But now everything had changed. Now there was a child involved. His child. Their child. The product of a love that had been building for 15 years and had finally, catastrophically, wonderfully exploded into existence. He had to find a way to save them all. And he had exactly 48 hours to do it before his engagement party, where Maxwell Sterling would expect him to announce a wedding date. Alexander picked up his phone and dialed the one person he trusted with his life. "Thomas," he said when his head of security answered, "we have a problem. Activate Protocol Blackbird. And get me everything you have on Maxwell Sterling's offshore accounts. It's time to end this war once and for all." If this story is already pulling at your heartstrings, drop a comment below and let me know what you think Charlotte should do. Should she trust Alexander, or run as far as she can? Your opinions matter, and I love reading every single one of them. 24 hours earlier, Charlotte Webb had been the happiest she'd ever been. She'd woken up in her cozy Brooklyn apartment, sunshine streaming through the windows, her hand resting on a stomach that still showed no outward signs of the miracle growing inside it. For the first time in weeks, the morning sickness had been bearable, and she'd actually managed to eat breakfast without running to the bathroom. The pregnancy had been a shock, of course. She was 36 years old, had long ago accepted that motherhood might not be in the cards for her, and had certainly never imagined that her first child would be fathered by her best friend after a night she could barely remember. Except that wasn't entirely true, was it? She remembered fragments. Pieces of a puzzle that didn't quite fit together. Alexander's hands in her hair. His lips on her neck. His voice, rough and desperate, saying words she'd spent 15 years dreaming of hearing. "I love you, Charlie. I've always loved you. Please, just give me a chance." But the next morning, he'd acted like nothing had happened. He'd made coffee and cracked jokes and never once mentioned the earth-shattering intimacy they'd shared. When she'd tentatively brought it up, about last night, he'd just laughed it off. "Last night? Charlie, I was so drunk I barely remember getting home. Did I do something embarrassing? Please tell me I didn't try to sing karaoke again." And just like that, her heart had shattered into a million pieces. She'd played along, of course. Laughed it off. Pretended that she, too, couldn't remember anything significant. But deep down, she'd known the truth. She had finally allowed herself to hope for something more, and he had crushed that hope without even realizing it. The pregnancy had changed everything. 2 weeks after that night, when her period was late and her breasts were tender and every smell in the world seemed amplified by 1,000, she'd known. Even before the test confirmed it, she'd known. Alexander Kane's baby was growing inside her. And she had no idea what to do about it. She'd spent those 2 weeks in a fog, going through the motions of her life while trying to process the impossibility of her situation. She'd attended board meetings and creative reviews and pretended that everything was normal, all while sneaking glances at Alexander and wondering if he could somehow sense the secret she was keeping. He couldn't, of course. He was too busy with his own secrets, meetings behind closed doors, hushed phone calls that ended the moment she walked into the room, a tension in his shoulders that never quite went away. Something was wrong, she knew. Something he wasn't telling her. But before she could confront him about it, the announcement had aired. She'd been at home, curled up on her couch with a cup of ginger tea, when the entertainment news segment had interrupted her cooking show. Breaking news from the world of business and society: Billionaire CEO Alexander Kane and socialite Victoria Sterling are engaged. The surprise announcement was made this afternoon at a press conference at Kane Industries headquarters, with Kane calling it a merger of two great families. The tea had slipped from Charlotte's nerveless fingers, shattering against the hardwood floor, but she'd barely noticed. On the screen, Alexander stood beside a stunning blonde woman, his public smile firmly in place, while reporters shouted questions and camera flashes exploded like tiny stars. Victoria Sterling. The daughter of Maxwell Sterling. The man Alexander had vowed to destroy after his wife's death. None of it made sense. Unless Alexander had never loved her at all. Unless those whispered words in the darkness had been nothing but the ramblings of a drunk man. Unless she had built an entire fantasy around fragments of memories that meant nothing to him. The pain had been blinding. Absolute. The kind of pain that makes you question everything you've ever believed about yourself and the people you love. And that pain had driven her to his office the next afternoon, pregnancy test in hand, ready to burn their friendship to the ground if that's what it took to finally tell him the truth. Now, standing on the rain-soaked sidewalk outside Kane Industries headquarters, Charlotte wasn't sure if she'd made the right choice or the worst mistake of her life. A black town car pulled up beside her, and the rear window rolled down to reveal a face she hadn't seen in over a decade. Maxwell Sterling smiled at her with all the warmth of a shark circling wounded prey. "Ms. Webb," he said pleasantly. "What a fortunate coincidence. I was just thinking about you." Charlotte's blood turned to ice. There were stories about Maxwell Sterling, whispered rumors about the people who had crossed him and the mysterious accidents that had befallen them. Alexander's first wife, Elena, had died in a car crash just 3 months after she discovered evidence of Sterling's illegal business dealings. The official investigation had ruled it an accident. Everyone in their circle knew it wasn't. "I have nothing to say to you," Charlotte said, but her voice wavered more than she would have liked. "Oh, I think you might." Sterling's smile widened. "You see, I couldn't help but notice your rather dramatic exit from Alexander's office just now. Tears, accusations, what looked like a pregnancy test. It was all quite theatrical. My security cameras captured every moment." Charlotte's hand instinctively moved to her stomach, a protective gesture that didn't go unnoticed. "Ah," Sterling said, his eyes following the movement. "So it's true. Alexander Kane's bastard child, carried by his business partner. How deliciously scandalous. What do you want?" "Simply to offer some friendly advice." Sterling leaned closer to the window, and Charlotte could smell his expensive cologne mixed with something darker. Something rotten. "Stay away from Alexander. Disappear. Go to Europe, have the baby, raise it somewhere far from here. Because if you don't..." He shrugged eloquently. "Well, accidents happen. Elena Kane discovered that the hard way." The car pulled away before Charlotte could respond, leaving her standing alone in the rain with Sterling's threat echoing in her ears. And suddenly, Alexander's engagement made terrible, horrifying sense. Sophie Kane was 16 years old, brilliant beyond her years, and absolutely certain that her father was making the biggest mistake of his life. From her perch on the grand staircase of their penthouse, hidden in the shadows where no one could see her, she watched the chaos of engagement party preparations with growing dread. Caterers rushed past with silver trays. Florists arranged enormous displays of white roses and lilies. A string quartet rehearsed in the corner, their music far too somber for what was supposed to be a celebration. And in the center of it all, her father stood like a man awaiting execution. Sophie had her mother's dark hair and her father's blue eyes, a combination that made her striking in a way she didn't fully appreciate yet. But what she had inherited most from Alexander Kane was his ability to read people, to see past their masks and into the truth beneath. Her father was not in love with Victoria Sterling. He was in love with Charlotte Webb. Everyone could see it, everyone except, apparently, her father and Charlotte themselves. The way he lit up when she walked into a room. The way he found excuses to touch her arm, her shoulder, the small of her back. The way he laughed at her jokes, really laughed, with an abandon he never showed anyone else. Sophie had spent her entire life watching them dance around each other, and she'd long ago made peace with the idea that Charlotte was the only woman she'd ever accept as a stepmother. Charlotte, who had helped her with homework and attended her dance recitals. Charlotte, who had held her while she cried about boys who didn't like her back. Charlotte, who had been more of a mother to her in the past 16 years than any of the women her father had actually dated. But now her father was marrying Victoria Sterling, a woman with a smile like a snake and eyes like a calculator constantly adding up everyone's net worth. Something was very, very wrong. Sophie pulled out her phone and scrolled to Charlotte's number. She hesitated, remembering her father's strict instructions not to contact her. "Charlotte is going through some things right now," he'd said, his voice tight with an emotion Sophie couldn't name. "She needs space. Promise me you'll give her that." She'd promised, but promises made to parents who were clearly lying didn't count, did they? Before she could make a decision, the doorbell rang, and one of the staff opened it to reveal a delivery person carrying an enormous flower arrangement. "For Mr. Kane," the delivery person said. "From Maxwell Sterling. With his congratulations." Sophie watched her father accept the flowers, watched the way his jaw tightened and his eyes went cold, watched him read the small card attached and then deliberately tear it into pieces. "Get these out of my sight," he said to a nearby assistant. "And add Maxwell Sterling to the list of people who are not to be admitted to this property under any circumstances." The delivery person cleared their throat. "Mr. Sterling said to tell you that he looks forward to the wedding. And he hopes Ms. Webb is doing well. He saw her yesterday and thought she looked